Well, hello. Wish I could see you, but I can't, and I'm really sorry about having our first class be an online class. But I really don't want you to drive in the snow. It's just too dangerous, and I don't want to drive in the snow as well. So I want to welcome you to the course. This is Social Work 3701, Child Abuse and Neglect, Intervention and Prevention. And I'm your professor. I'm Jane Gilgun. I'm a professor at the School of Social Work, and I have been doing research in this area for more than 30 years. Much of my research has focused on the development of violent behaviors, and as a result, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand child abuse and neglect and how it happens and what are its effects and what can we do to prevent child abuse and neglect and what can we do to help people who have experienced child abuse and neglect. So I have three research projects two of which are relevant to this class, and the third could be. The first one that's directly relevant to this class is a study I've had for about 11 years in Ramsey County, where I have looked at children and families who are designated the highest risk families in Ramsey County. And they all have experienced child abuse and neglect and other forms of trauma as well. And I followed the children over time for the length of time that they have services at this program, which is called ACE, All Children Excel. They typically stay in the program for at least 5 years, but they're eligible to be in the program from the time they enter, which is before the age of 10, and they would graduate at age 18. So I've tried to understand factors associated with good outcomes when children have experienced complex trauma. So that's one of my research projects. The second one that's relevant is something called the development of violent behaviors, the meanings of violence to perpetrators, and how people overcome risks for developing violent behaviors such as child abuse and neglect. I've had that project for more than 30 years, and that I've learned a lot from that program, and I'll be sharing much of what I've learned, or a lot of what I've learned in this class today. And the third is an oral history of a progressive Christian church in southwest Minneapolis. And I got to the point where I was studying so much negativity that I really needed to, just for my own sake, but also because I was curious, is how does an institution weather various storms and maintain a sense of optimism and progressivism throughout its history, which is about 117 years old right now. But it's a progressive church, and it's consistent with social work values to a large degree. We won't be talking about that study in this class, but we will be talking about the other two studies. So, as you know, this is a course in the Family Violence Prevention minor, and my charge is to talk to you and to help you understand and apply research, theory, practice, experience, and values. Because this is in the School of Social Work, I have to let you know right away that social work is a values-based profession. And the values that are fundamental to social work are social justice, care, autonomy, dignity, respect, and protection of vulnerable people. We're particularly interested in vulnerable people. And I would say that people who have been abused and neglected are vulnerable, and their parents are often very vulnerable as well. And the systems that are supposed to be helping them are also very vulnerable because they're underfunded. The people who work there often don't have the training to do the job, they don't have the support, they don't have the money, they don't get the salaries they need. And the legislatures, as you may have noticed, are quite insensitive to children and families and those people who work in the professions that work with children and families, and that's just a sad reality. My fantasy is one day all of us who work in abuse and neglect will rise up and say, okay, we're going to start talking, and we're not going to stop talking until the general public understands what's going on with these families and children. And there is a way to do this without compromising privacy and confidentiality. Because believe me, I've read, for example, many case studies that students have written about child abuse and neglect, and after a while, they all start sounding the same. The kids have complex trauma, the system doesn't help the parents, so the kids go into care, and they go from foster home to foster home, and it's pretty grim. And in this class, I really want to emphasize prevention and intervention, and we won't spend a lot of time going into the details of the suffering that children experience, but we will be very clear that children think that they did something wrong, that they're somehow bad kids because they were abused and neglected. And so that's a big part of our job, is to figure out how can we help children understand that they are worthy human beings, that's a value, that they've been treated unjustly, that's a social work value as well, that they have a right to tell people to leave them alone and to treat them with dignity and respect. And those are all social work values. And of course, kids are vulnerable, and so it's up to us as adults to figure out how we can create systems where there aren't millions of kids abused every day, and they don't get any help, and they're just floundering in the sense that they're bad kids and they're spoiled goods. So values are going to be very important in this course. The other thing that's really important in the course is an emphasis on meanings. I've already said that, but our question is always going to be, what do these events mean to the children? What do these events mean to their parents? What do these events mean to us as professionals? What do these events, child abuse and neglect, mean to the legislators? They're the people who are supposed to be making the policy and allocating the money to create better systems. And most of all, what does this mean to the general public? Because if we can educate the general public about these issues, then they put pressure on politicians, and sooner or later, maybe we'd get a political system that clearly puts the resources that are needed to help children develop to their full potential. So class each week seeks to foster your understanding and applications of child abuse and neglect in these various dimensions. So each week we'll cover one form of abuse and neglect, such as psychological maltreatment, an aspect of development, such as neurobiology, that adds to the understanding of abuse and neglect. So when you think of abuse and neglect, I want you to automatically think, how does this affect a child's development? So they're going to go hand in hand. The specific form of abuse and neglect, and then how do these forms of abuse and neglect